What's up, No Nation? It's the guys from Plant the Spear back with another episode for you guys. We are here to preview Florida State's spring practice session that is getting ready to start on Tuesday of next week, the 19th. And there's a lot of interesting topics that we're watching in this one, Michael. We got a few things we've kind of diluted down to the three main things that we're watching through spring. This is going to be our first chance to get a look at this 2024 roster in pads, out in practice type scenarios. We've got to see them in tour of duty. We've got to see how they look physically, but now it's
Yeah.
time to see how they look on a football field. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of new faces. There's a lot of pieces coming back that we like, but there's a lot of new faces that we have to get up to speed on. 2023, there wasn't a whole lot of guesswork. 2024, there's a lot of big changes. So there's a
Yes.
lot of exciting things. I think that's what makes this spring session makes it more crucial, more exciting, more interesting to watch as we try and read the tea leaves that come out of practice and before, obviously, all leading up to the spring game on April 20th. So I'm really excited to get in this episode. I think you guys are going to enjoy it because there's a lot of interesting topics that we have to talk about here. So before we get into that, Michael, thank you so much for joining me today, my friend. How are you doing?
Well, thanks for having me again, Jesse. Yeah, I mean, we're all excited for spring this year. And, last year going into the spring practices and spring football game, we kind of knew what we had because we had so many returning starters, both offense and defense. And so you kind of knew what we had. You were just trying to see what pieces that Mike Norvell and the staff were going to be able to implement to kind of help grow the opportunity for Florida State to be a more dominant team in 2023, which we saw by going 13-0. This year, while we have some returning pieces, a lot of the core pieces are new or transfer. And so we kind of we don't have an idea of what this team is going to look like or how the offense is going to be shaped around potentially DJU if he wins out, which we're all expecting him to do, or how those wide receiver core is going to look, and then obviously on the backside of the defense, who's taking the other safety spots. We're going to get into all of that today, so it's a fascinating spring.
Exactly. And I think when you listen to what you said, I think you make a good point. I think this year is kind of like coming into 2022.
Yeah,
You knew you brought in a lot of pieces that had potential. You just
right,
needed to see what they were going to turn out to be. And so I think this is kind of more along that vein where you don't really know what you got. You just
right.
like the pieces. And so
That's right.
you got to see how it plays out on the field. So what we're going to talk about today is, can Mike Norvell and Tony Tokars unlock DJU? And I
Mm,
got some interesting numbers for you there. I think you're going to be excited about some of these numbers that we're going to talk about. The next topic we'll get into is players living up to potential, the portal hit rate, and the young guys that need to step up. And then we'll talk about the 5 position group battles that we are most closely watching in this
yes,
spring. So to start with, we're going to start with the most important position on the field, and that's at quarterback. Now, of course, it is a battle. I'm
right.
not going to take Brock Glenn out of the picture. I mean, the
Correct.
guy's he's talented. He got to play a little bit last year. He's not just going to concede the
No,
position. I mean,
no.
it's if you think about it, he started the last 2 games, so it's his
That's
to
right.
lose.
That's
And so
right.
he's going to put up a fight, but assuming most of us assume that DJU is going to be the starter.
Mhm.
Now, really when you talk about DJU, and this has kind of been some of the things that the national talking heads have talked about and some of the other fan bases and whatnot, is DJU, to be honest, I have to be honest here. We like DJU. He's who I wanted out of the portal. I think he's a
Yep.
guy that can really elevate. He comes in with 40 Power 5 starts. He's won, I think, 30 and 10 in those 40
Yep.
games. He's a proven winner. Now, he also had a extremely high star rating coming
Yes,
out
he did.
of high school. I think he was like literally one of the top 200, 250 prospects ever to be ranked
Yeah.
by 247. So the potential has been there, but there's been some argument that he's really hasn't lived up to that potential.
Yeah.
And so this segment, we're going to talk about, can Mike Norvell and Tony Tokars unlock DJU's potential, because it's
Yeah.
in there. Now, the reason I say he hasn't quite lived up to that potential is looking back at his numbers. So in 2023, he threw at Oregon State, of course. He threw for 2,638 yards, had a kind of subpar completion percentage of 57.1%. Got to get a little bit better there.
Yeah.
In 2022 at Clemson, he threw for 2,521 yards, 6.8 yards per attempt, 61.9% completion percentage. So a little better there. But there's some things at Clemson that we talk about where that wide receiver core wasn't the best. It's kind of been their
Right.
Achilles heel the last few years. We know DJ left, and then the passing offense anyway, didn't really get a whole lot better. So
Right.
we have pretty much talked about before on the show that we don't feel DJU was the problem at Clemson. Maybe Clemson was the problem for DJU. Then he goes to Oregon State. He has a better year by percentage reasons. His completion percentage was off a little bit. That's got to improve. And we're going to talk about that
Right.
in a second. But he also really didn't have a whole lot of talent around him. Now,
Right.
that's going to take a big step up at Florida State. So this is really, I mean, you're looking at your final year college football on the most
Right.
talented roster as far as receiving core that you have to work with that you've had throughout your career. And the reason why we titled this as Can Mike Norvell and Tony Tokarz Unlock DJU is you have to look back at Mike Norvell's history with quarterbacks, and it's quite impressive. Now,
Very impressive.
we talked about how DJU was one of the best and highest rated quarterbacks coming out of high school. Mike Norvell has done insane things with guys who weren't the most highest rated guys coming out of high school. And so just to look back at the starting quarterbacks that he has had since his time as a offensive coordinator, sole offensive coordinator, which began at Arizona State, or
That's
head
right.
coach, Memphis and Florida State, there's some pretty impressive numbers here. And I had just took some notes to kind of sum it all up for you. So in 12 years as an offensive coordinator or head coach, only 2 seasons. Now, one of these we're going to have to put an asterisk by 2020 because they didn't play a full season. So it's
That's
hard to
right.
put up the same numbers. So only 2 seasons out of 12 did his starting quarterback fail to produce 3,000 yards passing. That was 2020
Wow.
FSU, only played 9 games, and 2021 FSU where they used multiple quarterbacks. You know, that was
Quarterbacks.
that was the shuffle year. They kind of
Right.
had a bunch
Right.
of different guys who were trying to figure things out. Only 2 quarterbacks have had a sub 60% completion percentage. Only 1 season since becoming a head coach has a starting quarterback not thrown for over 8 yards per attempt, and that was Florida State in 2021, which was 7.9, so pretty darn close there. He's had 2 seasons where the quarterback threw for over 4,000 yards, and
Gosh.
3 out of 5 of the quarterbacks that he's had as his starters as a head coach has thrown, or excuse me, as an offensive coordinator head coach, has thrown for 30 plus touchdowns in a season.
Oof.
And the fourth one threw for 29. And I think
Oof.
the fifth one threw for 28. So it's been pretty crazy. So he has a history of producing with quarterbacks. The average from 2012 up to 2023, of course, throwing out 2020, they average 430 attempts on the season. Now, this is something also that I think is interesting. When you look back at how they threw the ball at Florida State, they really haven't thrown it as much as they did at Memphis. So I think he still wants to see this offense throw the ball a little bit
Right.
more. I mean, you
Right.
look at some of the quarterbacks here. You look at DJU last year threw it 315 times at Oregon State. JT threw it 353 times in 2022. In 2023, he threw it 324 before he went out. So here's what, and let me just say this before we get into some numbers. This is what I did with Jordan Travis in 2023. Because he had already pretty much played 10 and a half games, I just used his averages to
Yeah.
project what he would have done.
What he would have done. Yeah.
If he played in the bowl game, he would have thrown it 412 times, roughly.
Gosh. Yeah.
So you see, they're getting back to where he
Right.
likes to throw the
Right.
ball, around 400 times a season. Now at Memphis, Brady White threw it 420 in 2019, 392 in 2018. Riley Ferguson threw it 474 times and 443 times. Goodness gracious, Michael. In 2015, Mike Bercovici at Arizona State threw it 531
Woo,
times.
woo. They were slinging that ball.
They were. And Taylor Kelly at Arizona State was 484 and 360. So you can see he likes to throw the ball 400
Yeah.
plus times a season.
Yeah.
And DJU was only at 315 last year,
Yep.
370 at Clemson. So I think you're going to see him throw the ball a little bit more. But I think the point of all these numbers is to just see what Mike Norvell has done with quarterbacks and where DJU is at. You can see the room for improvement. You can see where he could be. It would be surprising because remember last year we said he
Right.
threw for 2,638 yards, 8.4 yards per attempt, 57.1% completion percentage, which is the yards per attempt is in line. But the
Right.
yards you could see come up to above 3,000 yards. Now,
Yeah.
of course, DJU didn't play in our bowl game. You know, he wouldn't have probably thrown for that many, but he'd have been close to 3,000. So you would expect him to get to above that 3,000 level. You would expect him to get that completion percentage bumped up to above 60% because, again, Mike Norvell quarterbacks typically throw for above 60%. And he only threw for 21 touchdowns last year, which isn't a bad number. Maybe he gets closer to that 30 mark, the benchmarks.
Yeah.
And the reason I think these numbers are significant, and then I'll kick it back to you, is early on when Mike Norvell came here, we saw the first 2 years started out pretty rough, and everybody
Yep.
was kind of scratching their head. Is this really, we hadn't seen the offense that we brought in, the
Right.
offensive guru yet.
Right.
And I told everybody, I said, you have to look back at the data from Memphis, from Arizona State, all these years, and look at the production that they've had, and the numbers will trend in that direction.
Right.
And then 2022, I mean, if you look at the comparison, it was just silly. I mean, they were within like 5% on almost every single number. So I believed the long term data over the short term struggle, and the numbers came back to where they were at.
Right.
So for a quarterback, you would think the numbers will trend back to that direction. We saw
Right.
JT get better in year 2 as the
Uh,
full-time starter.
right.
So I would expect DJU to kind of take that step and progress back towards what Mike Norvell has historically done with quarterbacks. And if he does that, I think you're going to be on par for a really good season.
Yeah, I do too. I mean Mike Norvell specifically, and you can add in Tony Tokaras from this past year. You could talk about Kenny Dillingham from before, but they've had a track record of helping these quarterbacks grow every single year. Now, yes, we're only going to get DJU for one season, and that's it. But I think that in the progress of the season, you saw. Let's just use Jordan Travis as an example in 2021 when Jordan, kind of started the game against Notre Dame, then wasn't, and then Milton then. Well, finally, when they finally said, okay, Jordan is the quarterback, right? You actually started to see when they went on that 5-3 run to end 2021, you actually started to see progress throughout the year of him getting better, his accuracy getting better, his deep ball getting better, his completion percentage getting better, his yards per attempt getting better, all those things. Of course, then in 2022, those things took an astronomical jump and they got much better. Then in 2023, started out really hot, but then obviously the injuries piled up. So you see a continuous steady of progress with those quarterbacks, and I believe that they'll get a hold of DJU, they'll get him in the training, they'll watch film, they'll correct what they can correct. Now the thing is, like you said, he's in his last year of college football. There's only so much you're going to be able to quote unquote fix of his delivery, his stance, but they'll find that. They'll find whatever the little
Yeah.
tweaks that they need to make, and then they'll adjust that. And then the other side of this is, man, Mike Norvell has said this from the very beginning that this offense is built for playmakers. And so they're going to tailor. I've never seen, maybe outside a few coaches in college football, who can adjust their offense to the dynamic of the players. Like a lot of coaches say that. They'll say, oh yeah, we manipulate the offense and we cater around our players, but really they're just running the same thing over and over. Mike Norvell will literally find whatever the strengths of his quarterback is, whatever his running backs, wide receivers, all of them, and that's what they'll go to. And we talked about how he throws the ball. He wants to get back to throwing. He leverages the run to set up the pass. And sometimes, like last year in 2022, the year before that, they used the run to set up the pass. Then in this year, they had to use the pass to set up the run because teams were coming up and trying to stop the run all the time. I guarantee you, he'll get DJU in there if DJ's a starter, because we don't want to just go ahead and just say Brock is not starting. But if DJU's a starter, he'll figure out what best way to put DJU in, whether that's run the pass or pass the run. And if it's pass the run, then you'll imagine that he'll begin working on those. I know we're going to get into some of DJU's issues, but some of those issues of accuracy and getting the ball down the field in that medium route tree there, so that he could get better, so that he'll put FSU in a better position on the offense.
Right. And I want to point out one important thing too is to keep in mind with Jordan Travis, he didn't peak until
That's
his
right.
fifth and sixth year. And of course, he had the
That's
extra
right.
COVID year. But I mean, he thought about giving up playing
That's
quarterback,
right.
period. So
That's right.
the fact that DJU is a senior, this is his last year of college football. I think there's still some things that can be fixed
Yes.
there. I
Yeah.
still think, just when you look back at the history with Jordan Travis and how it took him so late in his career to peak, I also think at the same time, that's why DJU wanted to come here,
That's
because you
right.
see the history. I mean, when you talk about built for playmakers, you almost don't play quarterback. Like, you can take it to the bank that a Mike Norvell quarterback is going to throw for 3,000 yards.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just for the sake of conversation, the adjusted number that I got for Jordan Travis was around 3,257 yards if he had played the rest of the season. So again, it's extremely rare for him to have a quarterback that doesn't throw for 3,000 yards, that
Right.
doesn't throw for almost 30 touchdowns, that doesn't have that completion percentage above 60%. So if he can get DJU back to that,
Right.
to meet those standards, he's going to have a good year. And
Yep.
like you said, you can adjust the offense. Look back to 2020. I mean,
Yeah.
we were terrible. And they still ran for 199 yards a
God.
game because he knew he had Jordan Travis, a running quarterback. He knew
Right.
they really didn't have much to as far as passing offense.
Right.
So he played to his strengths. And if you go back and look at Mike Norvell's offenses at Memphis and throughout the years, if they have ran the ball extremely successfully. He
Right.
loves to run the ball.
Yes.
But I just think that you're going to see them, if DJU can live up to the billing, they're going to throw the ball more. And you like what they put around him that I think
Yeah.
should help too. I mean, when
Yeah.
you look back at what he had at Oregon State, we talked about this in a previous episode where and I know star ratings don't mean everything. We're
Right.
probably the number one chief, show for saying star ratings don't matter. But the star ratings between what Florida State has and what Oregon State has are pretty stark contrast. It's
Yeah,
night and day. So what he's
that's right.
surrounded with, the pieces, the speed, the depth at receiver, is something that's really going to help unlock DJU. But I just think when you look at where he's been, again, a quarterback who had a sub 60% completion percentage last year, he hasn't thrown for 3,000 yet in his career, which is,
Nope.
again, that's a bit of a head scratcher there when you talk about the level of talent.
Right.
I think he can get you to that level. Now, I think the other thing that's interesting too, the other aspect that I want to throw in here is that he is a runner. He is a
Yeah.
running quarterback. He ran the ball over 100 times at Clemson in 2022. And one reason I say that is because sometimes you might think, okay, well, if you have a scrambler, maybe he doesn't put up quite the yards.
Right.
That's not been the case with Mike Norvell. And this is why in 2022, I did a comparison where I said, well, hang on, I think Jordan Travis is going to I think he's poised for a breakout season.
Okay.
And he did,
And he
because
did.
I went back and looked at the history. That's why you look back at the data. Numbers don't lie. And
That's right.
so Taylor Kelly was another mobile quarterback at Arizona State. He had almost similar rushing numbers to Jordan Travis
Yeah.
from when I did the comparison the first time. Well, he threw for 3,040 yards, 66.9% completion percentage in his first year and as a starter. And in his second year as a starter, he threw for 3,635 yards and a 62.4 completion percentage. So
Mm.
you can be a mobile guy. And also
Right.
look at Jordan in 2022. I think he had like 500 yards rushing, still threw for 3,200 yards, 9.1 yards per attempt, 64% completion percentage. You can do both. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
think you're going to see them use that running ability, like you said, to tailor the offense
Yeah.
to the skill sets that they have. But I also think you're going to see a bump in his passing as well. And for the most part, like we talked about, we'll dive into some of the things with DJ now, is it's that mid-range accuracy
Yeah.
that's got
Yeah.
to improve. He's great at the deep ball. And
Yes.
we were kind of comparing some notes in the pre-show where he's gotten better year over year. And especially
Yes.
with the deep ball, he had,
Yeah.
what we say, 43% on the deep ball last year, which
Yes.
is
Last year.
really good. His short-term passing has been fine. It's just that mid-range that has to
Yeah.
improve.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, because on the deep ball, he's 43% this year, but like his last year at Clemson, or I'm sorry, first year that he was a full time starter, it was somewhere around 30%. So you saw the growth there. But when you get into that 10 to 19 yards, he's at 58.1% completion percentage, but he's had interceptions in that miss. I can't remember what the exact number was, but I think he's thrown like 4 or 5
I think it was
intercept.
4, yeah.
Yeah, 4 interceptions to like 8 touchdowns in that same time span. Now we want a comparison. Jordan from that 10-yard to 19-yard, Jordan was 59.4%. So just a tad bit better, but the difference was, I believe, that Jordan only had 10 touchdowns and 1 interception.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. It's not just the accuracy. It's being inaccurate and putting the ball in harm's way, which we know Mike Norvell is dead serious on. They always saw protect the rock, protect the rock, protect the rock. That's what was so successful about Florida State last year, is that that team rarely turned the ball over. It was almost a shock when they had a turnover. You're like, I was there at the Orange Bowl game, and I know it's not a game we want to talk about, and I don't even count it. But when they were turning the ball, I was like, oh my gosh, like what is going on here? Because it was rare to turn the ball over. So Mike Norvell puts a key emphasis on that. And so DJU, if he's going to grow as a quarterback, especially in his last year, he's going to have to find a way to, one, get the accuracy of that medium range of that 10 to 19 yards up. You want that somewhere around 60 to 65%, right? Because that is a little bit harder. You're trying to get the ball over the linebacker into that soft coverage there. So so it is a little bit harder to, but you want to get that in that 60 range. And you want to make sure that if you're going to miss where there where no
Yeah.
defenders at.
Yeah.
Miss in the middle where you're going to just drop it in there, or because you just do not want to turn the ball over in the middle of the field. That's the worst space to turn that ball over in.
Yeah, and Jordan Travis is one of the most efficient quarterbacks that
That's
I've
right.
seen in 2023. But and looking at some quarterbacks, the better quarterbacks through the numbers, like you mentioned, you kind of want your short to be around the 80 to 90
Yep.
range. Your mid range around that 60% is good, and your deep ball at 40% plus is
Yeah.
exceptional.
Yeah.
And we've seen he has the deep ball. It's just cleaning up that middle of that middle
That's right.
route, that 10 to 19 yards, like you mentioned. And so I think they're going to be able to do that. Obviously, you have a ton of talent at wide receiver.
That's
And
right.
again, keep in mind, this is something that we talked about on a previous show that sounds extremely counterintuitive when you think
Right.
that the passing offense could get better
Could
when
get
you
better.
lose Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, and Jaheim Bell. But I have to remind you about the Pitt game
That's
where
right.
you didn't have two of those three guys, your top two receivers, and Jordan just went out and threw for the most yards that he'd thrown for all season. So
That's right.
I just think with the amount of targets that you have to work with, they can work on the footwork, on his release, get a little bit quicker, a little snappier.
Right.
He's already got all the arm strength you can ask for.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think they're gonna be able to fix him and get him back to the numbers that we've seen quarterbacks produce under Mike Norvell, whether at Florida State, whether at Memphis, whether at Arizona State. Wherever he's been in charge, quarterbacks have produced. And so
Yep.
I think they're gonna be able to work with him and get him back to those levels. And
Yeah.
again, if they do, I think that's gonna really unlock the passing offense for the season.
Yeah, and I'll just say this last thing before we move on is that like, and what matters also too is how you play call, like the plays that you
Right.
design to put him in a position to be accurate. Like you can have him throwing, on the right hash, throwing an out route on the left side of the field. I mean, that's an NFL type throw. That's a 50-yard throw. So yeah, there's going to be some accuracy issues. There are only a few generational quarterbacks,
Jameis
Jameis Winston and Trevor Lawrence and those guys and Deshaun Watson who could have made those throws in college. So yeah, you're going to see accuracy issues with that. So part of this fix, that reason why we're so confident in Mike Norvell being able to get more out of DJU is because the way he calls, the way he calls plays, he's gonna put DJU in a situation where he's gonna have the most opportunity to throw the most accurate ball. He's going to call the plays where he has been the most accurate. And in those plays where maybe his accuracy is not as great, he's probably going to move the pocket. You're probably going to see a lot of sprint out. You're probably going to see a lot of roll out to get him where he can get to his side to make a better accurate throw. That's why we think, we're going to see more out of him, because we know that Mike Norvell will put him in a situation to be more successful.
Right, and they'll let him run. So if
That's right.
you have that threat, then obviously you have to play the pass differently on
That's right.
defense. So I think they're going to be able to leverage his skill set, and that's something before we move on that he did mention at Clemson. He said they just didn't. He didn't feel like they used him the way they should have in that offense. And that's something that I think Mike Norvell can do. And it's easy to tailor the offense this year because you got so many new pieces
That's
that
right.
everybody's kind of learning at the same time. And this is why I love the
Right.
transfer portal, because you have guys, he's already here for spring. He's
Right.
going to be here through the summer. He's going to be here in the fall. So you have time to sort this thing out. But you just look at the history. You look at the play calling, like you mentioned. You look at the production numbers that have 12 years of proof that they can get him
Right.
there. And so and Tony Tokars is another guy that really deserves a credit for what he's done at the quarterback position at
That's right.
Florida State. I mean, he's an up and coming quarterback coach. So I think they're going to be able to get him back. And I think it's going to be big for Florida State if they can. But that's going to be really one of the main things that I'm
Yep.
watching this year, because obviously we saw where Jordan emerged. That took Florida State to wherever they were going. It
That's
raised
right.
their ceiling and it took them a lot farther. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we're watching for in spring is, can the most important position on the field be who we expect him to be?
That's right.
It needs to be better than it was. That's the
Yes.
harsh truth of it. Like, I love DJU. I think I love what he brings size, rushing wise, the experience. It has to get better if Florida State wants to go towards a national title type run, ACC championship type run. It's got to get better.
Yeah.
But I think he's in a position that he can get better with this staff and with the roster surrounding him. But I will say this, Michael, you don't have to be Mike Norvell to unlock savings at Alumni Hall FSU, the
Oh,
sponsor of
come on
today's
now.
show. All you have to do is use code SPEAR to get 10% off new FSU gear at Alumni Hall. They got everything from clothes to gifts, everything that you need. Spring is coming up. You're going to want a new fit for that spring game. And so go check those guys out, 1415 Timberlane Road in Tallahassee or Alumni Hall online. Navigate over to the FSU page, use code SPEAR to get 10% off. So thank you for supporting those that support us, and thank you to them for supporting this show. So the next topic I want to get into, Michael, is players living up to potential and the young and slash depth players stepping up, because there's a lot of undefined roles, undefined spots on the
Yeah.
depth chart this year that we're going to need some guys to step up with. And when you look at going from 2021 into 2022, this is why I think this is a very similar year again. When I did the preseason magazine in 2022, one of the entire like 3 keys to successful season for Florida State was potential equals production. You
Okay.
had guys coming in that you thought could be good. You just didn't know if they were going to produce on the field. And all the potential in the world is great, but if it doesn't put up numbers, it doesn't matter. So this year, I feel like you're in the same place. You have a lot of guys that you feel really good about, that through high school recruiting, through the portal that you've managed to acquire, that are really talented, but they haven't produced yet on the field. So you need that
Yeah.
production to hit. Now, one thing about this staff and the portal is their hit rate has been insane. And we went through and kind of collectively decided here.
Yeah.
I had to make some adjustments because Michael talked me down off of some of these guys. But so in 2021, like Andrew Parchment, we had to give him a half a hit because he did 4th and 14. So like,
He did
bro deserves
14.
he deserves a half a point for 4th and
That's
14.
right. That's
But
right.
other than
That's
that,
right.
kind of a bust. But anyway, so
Yeah.
getting to it, the numbers, what you're looking at here is 2021, talking about the portal hit rate by Mike Norvell and the staff at Florida State. In 2021, we didn't count 2020 because that's just a shame of a season.
Yep.
Remember now, when you hear these numbers, remember 2021 was an extremely hard sell. You were coming off the
That's
back of
right.
your third
That's
losing
right.
season. You hadn't cultivated relationships in the state of Florida yet. Things just it was a tough time. So in the 2021 class, their hit rate was around 50% out of the 11 players that they took. Blue chip ratio, only 1 out of 11 was 9%. 2022, we saw a massive increase. They had an 85% hit rate in the portal. Now, when I say hit rate, the guys that we talk about, they came in and they filled the role that they were brought in to fill. Not everybody's Keon Coleman. Not everybody is Jared Verse. But you can come in and be a solid rotational player, and that can still be a hit. So that's kind
Right.
of how we define the terms. The hit rate in 2022 was 85%. The blue chip ratio was 39%. Now look at last year. The hit rate was 92%. That is absolutely
Whew.
insane that they
My
have been so
gosh.
good in the portal. 92% hit rate with a blue chip ratio of 67%. So overall, over their last 3 years, they've had a total portal hit rate of 76%. I don't know that there's a better one in the country. And so if you think that trend, we just talked about how trends, and
Yep.
can you revert to the mean? So if you look at what they've done over those 3 years, coming into 2024, they have signed. Now the blue chip ratio is only 67% because they have more transfers than they did in
Correct.
2023. But you also brought in the highest amount of blue chip players that you brought in at 10 so far
Yep.
throughout their time at Florida State. If you can get a 90% hit rate on these blue chip players, these 15 players that you brought in, you feel like you're going to be in a really good position to have a good season. Of course, there's also some younger guys, like you think of a KJ Sampson at defensive tackle. Some of the guys we're talking about, Daniel Lyons, some of these guys at defensive tackle that weren't brought in through the portal. They're high school recruits. They got multiple years on campus. It's time. We need these guys to step into that role now. And that goes
That's
for
right.
multiple positions. But I just think when you look at their history in the portal, their hit rate, and what they brought in, if they can follow that trend again this year, you'll feel really good about where you're at. But they're going to have to, because so many of these players are going to be relied upon this year
Yeah.
that you're going to have that hit rate. But history shows us that we're in a good position to expect that. And
Yeah.
that's something that we'll get to see in spring a little bit. You won't get to see it in a game. You'll know more in a game, but
Yeah.
you'll see the tea leaves come out in practice where it's like,
Correct.
oh, this guy's a dude, or maybe he's not what we thought. So,
Correct.
but that's what we're looking for as far as this goes in spring.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You'll start to, when you get out, start reading those practice reports or wherever you get your sources for practice from, you'll start hearing about certain guys. You'll hear their names over and over again, and you'll be able to kind of factor in, okay, this person might be a hit, this person sound like a bust. But then again, there's some people that you didn't hear about, in spring, that then totally bust onto the scene, during the season. And so it just depends on how seriously they take the spring, how seriously they're trying to grow. I know that the coaches, I would imagine, Jesse, that the coaches are going to be pushing really hard to try to
Yeah.
identify, especially along some of those position battles, which we'll get into in just a moment, especially along those position battles, to see what players are going to step up, what players are probably not, which then you'll start hearing about potential transfers again, right? And
Right.
so, again, what has been really cool about this coaching staff is that every year, as you've laid out the stats, every year the hit rate is getting better and better and better. I mean, they were already one of the best, like, talent identifiers, evaluators of talent in the country. I mean, this is why Alabama really, really desperately wanted Mike
Yeah.
Norvell, and then got Kalen DeBoer, because those two coaches are some of the best portal talent evaluators in the country. It's been everybody saying it.
Yep.
Mike Norvell has a keen eye, and this staff has a keen eye of being able to look through the thousands of players in the portal and say, okay, that player, that player, that player, that player. And for, again, I mean, 50, 85, 92% hit rate. I mean, you can't get any better than that. And then adding in the blue chip ratio that's coming into play. So not only are they identifying, diamonds in the rough, so to speak, but they're also being able to take these high caliber football players and getting more out of them. Keon Coleman from last year, like, he had a great year, great career at Michigan State. But then let's just say he doesn't get injured this year. Oh my gosh, he
Yeah.
was already at a high clip. Jaheim Bell was doing much more than what he was doing at South Carolina before his injury. I mean, Johnny Wilson was having a better year before his injury. Trey Benson. I mean, you just keep going over and
Right.
all throughout the lineup, even on the offensive line, even though the offensive line wasn't as great as they were last year, you saw individual players get better and
Right.
grow. And so you just only have to imagine that the players that are coming in, yes, they may not be a lot of production. Yes, there are a lot of unknowns about them. But if you trust, like you said, the data, if you trust the data, then the data tells us that that these players that are unknown and don't have many production, they're going to produce, and they're going to produce at a high clip, because this is what the staff has been able to get out of those players.
Right. And when you look back to 2021, I mean, you have to just remember that they were just grabbing bodies at that
That's
point. They
right.
they needed somebody with a
They were
pulse to,
desperate.
to wear
Yes.
pads and staying on the field. But once they were able to pick and choose, kind of the pick of the litter situation, I mean, 85 and 92% over the last 2 years
Whew.
as a hit rate is absolutely insane. And I think when you talk about the guys that they brought in, there's some that may not develop right away. I mean, you keep in
Correct.
mind, Vandravius Jacobs stole the spring. Didn't really do
That's
much
right.
throughout the season.
That's right.
Hakeem Williams really was
Di
kind of a disappointment in the spring, and then came
and
on a
then
little bit during the season, although he
That's right.
battled injury.
That's right.
You know, when you got to see Trey Benson in the spring game, we were okay. I see why they took him
Yeah,
now.
see. Yeah.
And Johnny Wilson was like, "Wow, this guy's 6'7" and runs like a deer." So you
Yeah.
saw it. It was spring where we started to see, like,
Yep.
okay, this team is going to be good. Or you
Right.
might have some guys that take a minute. I mean, Fentrell Cypress was a guy who
Yep.
started out pretty terrible in spring and
Yep.
then ended up
That's right.
holding down a starting spot throughout the entire year. So this just gives us a first look at whether these guys, and some of the guys they brought in are young. So that doesn't
That's right.
necessarily mean they can't be good next year. They can't be
Right.
hits down the road.
Right.
But you also, at least this gives you an opportunity to see this guy moves differently. This guy looks like a starter. He can step
Yeah.
into this role. And I think that's what you're going to start to see in spring, where they define who are the guys that are ready to contribute right now and who are the guys that maybe need more time.
Yeah. And I don't know if you said this already. I must have blanked out for a second, but I love the way that you describe hit versus bust, which was the idea of, like, when we brought you in, did you accomplish the job that we hoped you would accomplish? Not did you exceed and go get, 1,000 yards, or did not give up
Right.
any sacks, or 200 tackles and 8 interceptions. Like, did you do the job? Did you hold down the thing? If that is the baseline of what is a hit and a bust, I mean, you can imagine that these players that they brought in to, wherever, the Roydell Williams and the Malik Bensons and the Jalen Brown, like, all those players that we're now bringing in the offensive line, if they just do the baseline, this team is going to be, crazy to even say this, far
Yeah.
better than the team last year. If they just hit their baseline, if we get injury luck this year, because it seems like every year
I
we're,
know.
battling that. If we can have some injury luck this year, and every one of those players hits the baseline, which is do the job we brought you in to do. You
Yep.
don't have to go far exceed. You just can't be below it. If you're right at it, this team is going to be better. Just period.
Right. But you got to have the guys do, like you said, they have to come in and fill that role. And if you get, say 85-90% of them do what they're supposed to do, and then 20% of them go above their head, like a Jermaine
Correct.
Johnson or something
Right.
like that. Because I mean, you think about it, when you look back at those seasons and you talk about potential versus production,
Right.
if you hadn't had Jermaine and Kier popping off above their head, it would have been
Woo.
worse than it was. And so again, that's why I think, like, if you have a couple of these guys, like if you have a Marvin Jones have a
Yeah.
breakout season, if you have, a couple of these receivers, if you have Malik Benson have a breakout season, it's going to be absolutely massive. But if you
Right.
have a bunch of guys that don't live up to the billing, we could start looking at the other end of the spectrum, and,
That's
and we're
right.
hoping that doesn't happen. But that's why this spring is so important. Obviously, they'll have all summer to continue to work out, and the receivers and quarterback can get on the same page. You have fall camp and stuff, so it doesn't have to happen right
Right.
away. But you'll get a pretty good idea in spring of who's ready to step into
That's
these
right.
roles and who's not. And so that's something that we're really going to be watching for. Can they continue that hit rate in the portal? Because here's the other thing: not only has your hit rate gone up,
Right.
but the amount of talent that you brought in, the level of talent of those players have went up. So like you
That's right.
said early on, you kind of were doing pretty good shaking out some diamonds in the rough. You're out there paying them for gold. You found you a
That
few nuggets. Now you're just bringing in gold bars. I
He's
mean,
just
you
bringing
got
in gold
like
bars.
right, you just got 10 blue chip players that you brought in. And if you can hit 90% on that, you have to feel extremely good about where
Yeah.
the direction that the season's headed. So,
Yeah.
let's hope
I got
some of
this
those
image of Mike Norvell just like Scrooge McDuck, watching his gold bar, like, look at
right
this Keon Coleman. Look at
just
this Malik Benson.
diving into the room full of gold coins and stuff, like, and I think that's what's so exciting, man, is this
Yeah.
roster has gotten, like, talent wise, star
Yeah.
rating wise. And again, we know that Florida State has a big history of playing above their star rankings,
That's right.
but star rankings I mean, it does matter. Like, most 5 stars are usually hits. It's very
Yeah.
rare that they're a bust. It does happen, but you see that blue chip ratio steadily going up. And so if they continue that hit rate, they continue the development, but with more talent. I mean, if they could
Yeah.
get to 13-0 last year
Yeah.
with a sub 50% blue chip ratio, and this year they're going to be at or close to it, because we
Right.
don't know what the roster is going to shake out. Some people could leave, some people could stay, and there's another portal session coming up. Man, it just makes your mouth water for what the
It
season
does.
can be.
Well,
Like,
well,
what
yeah,
can
and the
they
thing
do with a loaded roster?
exactly. And here's the thing. I mean, it's just point simple. Diamonds in the rough win you games. 5-star talent wins you championships, right?
Fact.
Like you can get all the diamonds in the rough you want to, and you'll win some games, and it'll be great and fun. But if you really want to compete for a national championship, you want to compete for an ACC, hopefully future SEC Big Ten championship, you need those talented blue chip players who are going to take you over the edge. You're going to get you over the hill there and win those titles for you. So yeah, let's get all the diamonds in the rough we want. But man, let's get those 5-star talent and let's develop them so we can win a championship.
Right, right, exactly. So now, talking about where some of these talented players are going to shake out at, we're going to talk about 5 position group battles that we're most heavily watching this spring. Now, there's a lot of quarterback is a battle. Technically, that's one that it's either going to be one of two, and it's
Right.
probably going to be DJU. So that's not really one we're watching. Running back,
Right.
that's going to go by committee regardless,
Maybe.
because we've
Yep.
seen how they've done it the last 2 years, using 2, 3, sometimes 4 backs throughout a game. So that's not one that we're really heavily watching, because we know they're all going to play. So the first one that we can talk about, we'll start with offense here, is wide receiver. And
Mm.
that's probably because we have 55 receivers on the roster. Literally half our roster is receivers. But
Gosh.
what's interesting about the receiver room is, who's the starters? You don't
Who?
know. You're who? Like,
There
you
is
have
no position that's like a surefire they're starting.
right. And like, the crazy thing about it is, I could probably point to 8 guys I like to start.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of those 8 I could pick to be the starter, because they're
Yes.
all equally exciting, but they all equally haven't produced on the field.
Correct.
So we like where they're at from a talent standpoint, but we're basically wiping the slate clean and starting over. Of
That's right.
course, you have Kentron Portier, Darion Williamson coming back, Destin Hill and Hakeem
That's
Williams. You
right.
have a lot of guys, but they weren't your starters. They weren't your
That's
your
right.
big time producers. Now, I think the biggest thing to start with is the veterans in the room, who we just mentioned, Portier and Williamson.
Yeah.
Those are guys, and I mean, Malik Benson's a veteran too. He just hasn't been on Florida State's roster for that long. Those 2 guys, I think, are very viable options. They have size. They've shown you that they can make catches in games.
Yep.
Darion Williamson comes in, has a 100-yard game against Boston College in
That's right.
22. You don't see him the rest of the season until the bowl game.
That's right.
Portier comes in, has like a
Oh,
great catch against Georgia, put up basically your only offense of the entire
that's right.
game. Then he leaves with injury. So, really, for them two, I think one of those two could be in a starting role. They just got to stay healthy. That is the
Yeah.
biggest question mark there. And then who do you fill out after that? I obviously have made it known 100,000 times that I am a huge fan of Malik Benson, and I think he is going to be WR1, wide
Mm,
receiver one, as they say. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to step into the starting role. But you also have Jalen Brown. You also
yep.
have this when you look at the slot, you have multiple options there. You have Jakai, you have the Fryer kid that come in as a freshman that they like that you were telling me
Yeah.
beforehand. You
Yep.
also have Destin Hill, who was banged up last year, and again was his first time playing college football
That's
in
right.
3 years. So it's not for lack of talent, it's not for lack of pieces. It's just sorting that room out. I mean, we still forget, we kind of lose down the depth chart that you have Deuce Spann.
Yeah.
Deuce Spann, they said last year at, let's see, 6'4", 207 pounds, was clocked as the fastest guy on the team last year.
And
Now,
he
I
was
don't know if
switching
that
from quarterback to wide receiver.
right, like, I don't know if that's gonna hold up this year, but you just have so many guys like, Hakeem Williams and all these guys that we feel like could step in. You have a plethora of targets that
Yeah.
could be starter level, but who is gonna emerge in that room? Who is gonna take that step up? Who is gonna be the leader in a group that doesn't really have a leader at the moment? And I
That's right.
like what I've heard out of the tour of duty with Malik Benson,
Yeah.
being a line leader, being a vocal leader. That's something that I'm watching as well. But man, this is gonna be one of the I think the most competitive battles because of
Oh,
the
yeah.
level of talent in the room. And
Yeah.
so this is one that I'm really watching for spring as wide receiver because you have so many.
Yeah.
So I mean, the good thing is whoever doesn't win the position group battle is still friggin' good and can
Oh,
still
yeah.
make
Oh,
it on
yeah.
the field and contribute. But this is a really crowded room with a lot of talent that we're going to be keeping our eye on.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they only got one ball. I don't know how they're going to get
Yeah.
that one ball to all those players, So this is why Mike Norvell and Ron Dugan and those guys are paid the big bucks to figure this out. I think too, I'm really excited about Malik Benson. Like you said, the stuff that you're hearing from the tour duty and how he's taking in a leadership position. I mean, he came from Bama. Obviously, he's got that Bama core in him where they're hard on him. They grill him. He's got that body. He's ready to go. So I do think he could be, if you're, like I play Madden, so looking at the X and Y, I think he could be your Y, your your WR1. I also think on the other side though, your circle, your zero, your WR2 there. I really think Portier might step up this year if he can stay
Yeah.
injury free. Like you said, the key is being able to stay injury free. He's kind of had an injury riddled season, but when he's in there, when he's playing, man, he is electric. He is
He's good.
good. And so I do think Hakeem Williams is going to factor majorly into this wide receiving rotation this year. He's come back from injury. His body looks good. He's got good mentals from what we hear and see. You saw it against that in the Syracuse game, I believe it was, when he got the ball. I mean, dude, you did not want to be in front of him.
Yeah.
And so I really think he could be a big factor. You're going to have Jalen Lucas. You're going to have Destiny Hill in the slot there. This Cameron Fryer guy, I mean, I've heard nothing but electric comments about him. I was telling you in the pre-show that I've heard that he's been compared to a Hunter Renfrow type player, which I mean, if you've been ACC or you've played Clemson, you've always been like, I really hate this dude, but I wish he was on our team kind of thing.
Hey,
Well,
I'll say it, man. Those little white slot receivers that I think North Carolina had one there for a little
yes.
bit. Clemson has had one. Like,
Ah,
they kill us, and it's about
they
time that
kill
we
us.
have one too. So
Exactly. And so I'm hearing that as well, like just from the reports I'm seeing on social media and stuff. So this is going to be a very fascinating battle of who gets, the starting slot. Mike is gone. Typically, he's always got at least 3 wide receivers on the field. So, you're going to have that slot receiver. It'll be interesting to see who your 1 and 2 and your slots are. But then again, man, they're so interchangeable. That's the beauty about this
yeah.
group. Even with we haven't even mentioned Jalen Brown yet, the LSU transfer. So they're so interchangeable. You got tall receivers, you got length, you got body mass, you got catch rate, you got all those things. Now it's about putting it on the field, seeing what the production is of that, and that's gonna be an electric battle this spring.
Right, and you actually just said the next thing that I was gonna comment on is I love the difference the
Yeah,
different skill sets that you have. You have size, you have a bunch of guys that are over 6 foot tall, you got a couple that's 6'3", 6'4", you have some bigger bodies that
Yes.
can go up and get the ball, that can kind of box DBs out. You have some little guys who can kind
Yep.
of work in space that I
Plays.
really like.
Yeah.
So you have a lot, and of course, it all depends on who stays in the boat after spring
That's
because you
right.
could lose a few, but you just feel good. Like if you were to sub out Portier for Hakeem, you feel
Right.
like you're not missing a step. If
It's not
you
gonna
had to put
drop.
in
Yep.
Jalen Brown for Malik Benson, you feel like you
Right.
have another good target there. And I think last year, one of the problems was from your ones to your twos, you
Yeah.
just kind of weren't. You had a little bit of a step down there, and that was a
Yep.
little bit of concern. Now, at the same time, I just talked about how we threw for the most yards when we were with our backup, but on a consistent basis,
Yeah.
you didn't really have a consistent set of twos, and so
That's
now
right.
I think this year you're going to have a consistent set of ones, twos, threes, and there's a lot to watch for. So this one's going to be interesting. Now the next position group battle that we're watching is, let's go switch over to defense for a second. This is at the safety position.
Mm.
This is an interesting one because you're really only fighting for one spot. Now, we feel pretty confident that Shaheem Brown is going to hold down one of the
Yeah.
safety spots. And he did really good last year. He's
Yep.
become an experienced player. He's a leader of the defense now. And so I like what Shaheem brings
Yeah.
to the safety position. He was my breakout player last year. And he did well. So you feel pretty good about there. Now, the other safety spot could be one of five guys. You're just kind of tossing it in the air. I mean, of course, you got Akeem Dent you got to replace.
Yep.
We saw Conrad Hussey play last year, who
Yeah.
flashed in very limited action, but he's
Yes.
still young. He's only a true sophomore. This is my dark horse pick for the season. I
That's
kind of
right.
like, I kind of like him to maybe step into that starting role. But you also have Kevin Knowles, who he had a pretty up and down year last year at the safety
Yeah.
position. A lot of it, like we discussed in a previous episode, was with his tackling,
That's right.
but it was his first year at safety. So now he has 2 years there as well. So he's a guy that's going to be battling for that position. You also have KJ Kirkland, who's a massive body type,
Yeah.
6'1", 197, redshirt freshman, now has a year in the system. Ashlyn Barker was a JUCO transfer that they really like. Another guy was incredible size, 6'3", 206 for a safety. And then you have Devontae Brown, who comes in from Miami. I know they kind of got a lot of flack about taking him, but he was actually really good at UCF. And he's another spot you have at the safety. So you have so many guys to choose from. Who is going to emerge as that number 2 safety? Now, we were actually talking about this too with the corner position. You feel good about Fentrell Cypress. You feel good about Azaria Thomas.
Yeah.
And then you like a lot of the young guys that you have
Oh yeah.
behind it. But once you look at the roster, you're a little bit thinner at corner than you thought
Yeah.
you were,
Yeah.
unless you're talking about turning to some younger, unproven guys. So if you're this deep at safety, in a sense, and I don't want to say deep because you
You
don't
still
really you don't feel great about all the options.
right.
Maybe Kevin Knowles could go back to corner or something like that to give you some
Yep.
depth there. But just watching the safety position, man, I think it's gonna be interesting to see who develops because you have Kevin Knowles, who is the most veteran on the team at that position,
Outside of
on
Brown. Yep.
right on Florida State's roster, who has played at Florida State, familiar with the defense and all that stuff. To me, you have Conrad Hussey, who's the most talented. He has the
Right.
highest ceiling. This guy was a 4-star coming out of high school, big time get for Florida State. I'm sure is going to be a starter at least this year or next year.
Yep.
And then you don't count out Devontae Brown. The guy's played a
Yeah.
lot of football.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, he didn't have a good year at Miami, but he had good years at UCF, but it's Miami. So,
It's Miami. Mhm.
I don't know how many people have a good. I mean, look at what we think Daryl Jackson's going to do coming from Miami to Florida State. So
Exactly.
and KJ Kirkland again is another guy that's made noise during the tour duty workouts. So this is an interesting position group battle that we're going to be watching at safety. So I'll let you share some thoughts on what's going to happen with the safety position other than Shaheem Brown hopefully locking down a spot. And I will say this too: you feel good about safety
Yeah.
with Shaheem Brown, but remember, Akeem Dent missed a few games last year,
That's
so
right.
you want to develop at least 3 to 4 guys in case that situation happens again.
Correct.
Because last year when Akeem Dent went out, you ran into trouble quick.
You did. You really did. And you saw where that depth issue came into play. So, yeah, you feel great about Shaheem Brown. You think he'll make another jump this year, his 3rd season. He played significant snaps his 1st season in 2022. Obviously started and played a lot, played well for the most part in 2023. And you think he'll make that jump in the 2024 season. Where they go there, man, this is as much of a this is like the wide receiver all over again.
Yeah.
This is as much of a mystery as anything because like you said, Hussey has the highest ceiling probably of all of them right now. And so do you go with him? Do you play talent over experience? Because if you're going
Right.
to experience, then you're going to put Kevin Knowles there, right? I mean, that's just the
Yeah.
easier thing. But again, you already mentioned this, and we talked about this in the preseason, in the pre-show, is that, man, since you feel a little bit thin at corner, do you put Kevin Knowles back at what was his natural position, which he played much better than he did at safety, which is the corner position? So if you put him there, now you are looking at, KJ Kirkland and Devontae Brown. And I'm with you on this Devontae Brown kid. I know we got a whole bunch of flack. People making fun of us for making fun of FSU for taking Devontae Brown. But like you said, listen, who thrives outside of Restrepo? Who thrives at Miami, right? Who
Right. Look at
does?
look at their two safeties last year. Cam Kinchins really
Kitchens. Yep.
regressed. I
Yeah,
mean, he
he
really
did.
regressed. So
Absolutely. So
yeah,
who thrives? So he might get here, and let's just go ahead and say what it is. I mean, like, Patrick Surtain is a much better DB coach than whoever is coaching at Miami, and so he'll get that development. And who knows, he might turn out to be like the diamond in the rough again
right.
that we didn't see and could find. And so I really think, though, if I'm Patrick Surtain, if I'm Adam Fuller, man, I'm really looking at. I really like this idea of moving Kevin Knowles back to the DB spot to give you more depth there. I know they got Earl Little. I know they got that, but man, you just want to make sure you have that sewn up. And I'm looking at Hussey and Devontae Brown and KJ Kirkland and say, okay, which one of you can be the safety one, and then which one of you can develop so you can back up if either one gets injured, and then
Mhm.
go from there. That's kind of where I would be looking at. But these coaches make big bucks. They're smarter than I am.
Right, exactly. Me too. But I mean, again, you trust the staff and their decisions. You just want to
Right.
see who's going to emerge as the possible other starter and then who's going to emerge as some depth players that would be quality depth, which is what you need in case you lose somebody.
That's
Now,
right.
the next one that we're going to talk about is offensive line. And this is one that, I think early on, I really didn't think this was a position group battle to watch. But then we
But it
started
is.
counting earlier, and we have 17 offensive linemen on the roster.
Jeez.
Now, only a little handful of them were freshmen, so those guys you
Correct.
expect to be okay with not contributing. There's a couple of upperclassmen that, you know, maybe you look at their transfer portal candidates if they just don't like. Bryson Estes is a guy that I
That's
brought
right.
up in the pre-show where, he's been around the program for a while. I think he's a redshirt junior, and he's a guy that hasn't found his way on the field yet. So does he transfer out? Does he just
Right.
kind of stay in that role as a career backup? We'll have to wait and see. But you have 17 guys to choose from. And
Yeah.
the thing is, you bring back a lot of your starters from last year, a lot of your core starters, but you also add two really good transfers that
That's
so
right.
far through tour of duty have been the ones that stood out the most
That's right.
in Richie Leonard and the Ferguson kid, the TJ Ferguson from Alabama. So if you pencil in those two guys as very likely potential starters, then where does everybody else go? Because of course you have Darius Washington, who can pretty much play everywhere.
Anywhere. Yep.
Who's going to be your backup center? Which I
Yep.
know they've talked a little bit about a couple guys working there. Who's going to be your tackles? It's year 3 on campus for Julian Armella. When is that? When is that
Yeah.
recruitment going to play out? I mean, this is a
Right.
guy that we were extremely excited about that just hasn't found his way onto the field yet. You
Right.
also have the Lucas kid, who's
That's right.
probably your highest ceiling lineman just from his build. He's built like an NFL offensive tackle.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
only in year 2, and he's got some veterans in front of him, so it may be another year for him, but that's another guy that could certainly be fighting for a starting position. So, I mean, you have a lot of guys that you feel really good about, and I think the best thing about this is you finally will have 7 to 8 guys, maybe 9 guys that you feel confident rolling with. And
Yep.
last year, we know this offensive line was extremely beat up throughout the
Yes.
season. And
Yes.
so it's good to have the depth, but who's going to end up emerging as the starters? And I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, just talking about a guy like Robert Scott Jr., he was a guy that you had penciled in as a starter
Mm.
due to injuries, barely even played last year, but now he
Right.
comes back again for another year. So it's going to be interesting to watch, man. There's a lot of positions where you could see one guy beating out the other, and some of the
Right.
guys who maybe starters that are coming back that might not be promised to have a starting job.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yeah.
interesting to see how this one plays out.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. I don't know how I feel about this, Jesse. Like, I get it with the defensive linemen, the linebackers, and the DBs, even your wide receivers, your running back. I get it, like the rotation and stuff like that. offensive line last year, I know even before the injury bug started really catching on, they were rotating linemen. I don't know if this is the way football is going, where certain plays, certain play calls, certain play dynamics, you want this offensive lineman in, that offensive lineman in. I remember Alex Atkins saying in the springtime and coming into preseason camp, like, "Oh, we got 8 guys that we can run with, and we're gonna rotate them out." And I'm like, what happened to the days where you wanted your solid 5, and those are the guys that were going to
Yeah.
run block, pass block, and do all that for you? I'd love it this year if they could do that. If they could get 5 solid guys, like these are the guys. And then, yes, we have 5 guys or maybe 3 guys after those solid 5 they're good enough. There's just like a bit missing there.
Right.
But yeah, if we put them in there, they'd be fine. But I want 5, hog mogs, pass blocking, run you over, beat you up. They mean mugging you, right? Like, the Dylan Givens,
Yeah.
I miss the Brian Stork days, like, big old beard and just, rah, just get
Yeah.
you. That's what I want us to develop. And again, we thought Robert Scott going into the season, okay, that's going to be our tackle. He's going to hold it down. It's going to be great. And then, yeah, he barely played. They saved him for most of the year. He'd come in for a couple snaps and you wouldn't see him again. You got Maurice Smith back, who played banged up the entire year. I mean, the Louisville game was like his Herculean effort, his Michael Jordan flu game. I mean, the dude could barely walk, but he played. You have Jeremiah Byers coming back. You got Keandre Jones coming back. And then, of course, the Swiss Army knife, Darius Washington. So those are 5 right there. Now, are those your starters? Don't know. Because you have TJ Ferguson from Alabama. I mean, this dude, you look at him and you're like,
He looks
oh,
like an Alabama offensive lineman.
Jeez Louise. And so you can't knock that. You got Richie Leonard from Florida, who was their best offensive lineman coming over. So, like, you got to look at that. So that position battle is going to be interesting as well too. Dare I say, Jesse, some of these guys that you love and have been here for a bit got recruited over?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, the thing with offensive line is the hit rate with offensive line tends to be lower because you just
Yep.
don't know how they're going to
Yeah.
project and how they're going to develop. So you really just have to take as many as you can and let the cream rise to the top, and then the rest
Yep.
of them just figure it out. But I do think your floor is getting a little higher this year. I think
Yeah.
last year, like, man, I really shout out to Dylan Gibbons. Like, he was one
Yeah.
of my favorite offensive linemen. I will never forget when he came off the field. I think it was the Florida game, and his face mask was
His mess
literally
fit.
sideways from hitting dudes so hard. And it's like, I love that. But I think last year, like we mentioned, through health and not having Robert Scott most of the
Yeah.
year, having guys like Maurice playing through injury, you took a step back. We know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this year you feel better about the floor being a
Yeah.
little bit higher, and you just got to figure out who's going to be the starting 5. Because again,
Yeah.
like you mentioned with offensive line, it's a very continuity heavy position group.
Yeah.
But one thing I will say that I like, just looking at the roster real quick, man, we have some size. I mean, Robert Scott, 6'5", 313. Maurice Smith, he's pushing 300 pounds. But you also have Jeremiah Byers, 6'4", 325. You have Richie Leonard, 6'2", 320. You have TJ Ferguson, 6'4", 320. Armella, 6'6", 320. DeAndre Jones, 6'3", 332. You got Darius Washington, 6'4", 306. So you have a ton of size. And I mean, Lucas Simmons, this is why I'm excited for this guy to get on the field. 6'8", 313 pounds, long
Jeez.
arms, long legs, built like an offensive tackle, just a redshirt freshman. So the pieces, I think it's like wide receiver and all these other ones. The pieces are there. You're getting more
Yeah.
excited about the clay that you have to work
Yeah.
with. It's just who's
Yeah.
going to emerge as the starters. But again, competition breeds excellence. So the fact that you have 8 guys vying for that 5 spots, I think that's going to create the best starting 5 that you have. And then it's just going to be about having them stay healthy throughout the season.
Right.
Now, the next position group that we're going to talk about, this is one where you lost you lost Jared Verse, and this is defensive end. You feel good about Patrick Payton. You figure he's probably got one of those starting spots locked down. I mean, the guy is the leader of the defensive line.
Right.
He is a veteran player now. But then you got a handful of guys outside of that you don't really know how they're going to shake out, but you love all of them. And I feel like the most exciting thing about this entire episode is the narrative that we keep hitting in every position group is you love who you have. You just need to see it translate to the field.
That's right.
So like
That's right.
we love who we have. You're getting better. But looking at that defensive end role, I mean, you have Patrick Payton, who we feel again is locked down that one side. Then you have Marvin Jones Jr., who kind of has that similar body type to him.
That's right.
Is he going to start up because he's probably your high ceiling guy, 5-star coming out of high school, all this stuff? Is he going to step into that other starting role opposite of Patrick Payton, or is he going to be a really solid 1-2 punch
Right.
with Patrick Payton as they rotate out. And then you move some of your heavier guys over to the other side to be that kind of bigger Jared Verse, push him around type of
Right.
defensive end, that run stopper type of guy with Sione Loleha at 6'3", 270. You got the Durajayi kid at 6'4", 280. You have Jaden Jones, someone that a lot of people forget about, has been coming off
Yeah.
injury, JUCO transfer, 6'5", 252. Lamont Green Jr. still got to put some weight on, only 223 pounds right now, coming off injury last year. But Byron Turner Jr.,
Yeah.
another guy that played significant snaps for you last year. So you have a plethora of guys that you like, but you only really have one starter penciled in. So I think it's figuring out who's going to be that opposite starter. I like the Sione guy because he's a two-time all-conference player. He's
That's right.
extremely experienced. I think that Durajayi would be good behind him because he's a more of a raw talent who has all the physical tools you would want in the world. I mean, the guy is
Right.
a beast. He just needs to be refined a little bit.
Right.
So I think he's a good two punch off the bench. Now Byron Turner Jr., this is a guy who became as a contributor last year.
That's it. That's right.
Is he one that maybe looks for the door if he gets bumped down
Mm.
the depth chart? Maybe not. But the good thing is we were talking about this earlier at the defensive end position. Last year, you felt really good about 1 and 2. You had one of
Yeah.
the most elite defensive end pairings in college football. The twos were okay. You had Byron
Mhm.
Turner, and then you had Gilbert Edmond, who is gone now back to South Carolina. So you kind of felt okay about that. Man, 2024, I legit love the three deep. I
Yeah.
mean, the top 6 defensive ends. Now, 5 and 6, maybe those are not pressure situation guys, but I think like really 1 to 2 and 3 and 4 are very high level players. And
Yeah.
then I think we have 6 legit defensive ends if nobody transfers out that are battling
Yeah.
for a position here.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're so right on that. Like, you had Jared Verse, you had Patrick Payton. They're like the penthouse of DE linemen, right? And then when you brought in, Byron Turner and Gilbert Everett, and not that they were bad players, but they were kind of like the break room, players. Like,
Right.
they're not your higher suite. And so that drop-off level was significant. I mean, there were many times that FSU fans were like, man, you notice when the offense was moving the ball more was when they were in, right?
Yeah.
Because they were trying to get them reps. They were trying to get them significant game reps in significant moments, which I totally understood that. But now you feel like, okay, if Patrick Payton, whoever else is on the other side is out and they're rotating in, you don't feel you feel like right now we're at spring here, pre-spring. You feel like at pre-spring that level is not going to be so significant like it was last season. That you're going to drop a level depending on who it is, but it's not going to be as bad as you want or as bad as you're not hoping for. And I do like Lolo Heya. I think he could be a dynamic person that you're bringing in. Twitch, got great twitch, can get around a little bit smaller, but like
Yeah.
still has that ability to get to the passer, to get inside the lane there, make sure you clog that up. I think MJ Jr., I mean, gosh, I'm hoping for his dad part two. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't think you got to see that as much as at Georgia. Honestly, to me, I think he realized he made a mistake. He should have never went to Georgia in the first place. Should have came here. It would have been far more developed, far more a star. And he had to sit around. He had to sit behind people, and then he didn't get as much development. I think you're going to see that come alive here. And what's cool about him is that he's not just a DE. He's not just a defensive end. He actually has the size and ability that if you wanted to, if Adam Fuller and John Papuchis decided to, they could actually pull him out a little bit and have him cover around that 5 to 10 yard range there. It doesn't have to be, anything significant, just like be a space eater, really.
Right.
And so that's like the hybridness of MJG that I get excited for. And then I think George Iowa, I think you're going to see Byron Turner. Well, this is they say in the NFL when it's your contract year, it's a show me year, right? Well, this is a show me for Byron
Yeah.
Turner because you're right. I do think I hate to say it, I do think he's a transfer portal candidate if the spring doesn't turn out how he's hoping for. I think everybody else, I think you're just kind of still testing out. Don't forget, we still got Aaron Hester, who was thought of to be a potential contributor coming out of the high school ranks and just hasn't really been able to show that. He's still got to grow a little bit, but we'll see kind of how that develops.
Yeah, and I like what you talk about with MJ Jr. I mean, this is at Georgia. He played a lot of stand-up
Yeah.
linebacker.
Yep.
He played, and he was banged up too, so
Yep.
that hurt his development a little bit. I think now he's gonna get back to playing more of his true position, but he does
Which is
give you
DE.
that
Right.
versatility, and he has mentioned before that him and Storms are gonna try to get him up to around 260 or so,
Yep.
270, before the season starts. So, I mean, if he translates into what his potential was coming out of high school, that, consensus 5-star who has all the tools and the bloodline,
Right.
I mean, that's gonna be a guy that you think is an immediate starter
That's right.
and could be a star status. That could be a Jermaine Johnson 2.0 right there. And you feel amazing having like the fact that you could have a Jermaine Johnson 2.0 and you really are not sure how you're going to get him on the field quite yet. Is he going to be able to jump this guy or not? That's extremely exciting at the defensive end position.
Yeah.
Again, Sione Loaleha, this is a guy that comes in that you want to see. Can they bring him? Can they elevate him a little bit more? Just like the
Yeah.
DJU thing we
Yeah.
talked about. You know what he is, you know his floor, but can you elevate that ceiling just a little bit more to get a little bit more out of him?
Yep.
Durajai, that's a man child. Like,
That's a
can
man
they
child.
refine? It's like a bull in a china shop. Can they refine his skill set enough to make him a really effective defensive end? But I like all the pieces that you have,
Yeah.
and I think it's just right now it's going to be finding out in the spring anyway, finding out kind of who steps into that other starting role and kind of the body types you have and how they use them to fill out your depth chart there. And then, of
Yeah.
course, after the spring, who stays and who doesn't.
Yeah.
But I love the depth that you have, and I love the competition and the level of athletes that you have in the room. Because, like we talked about, even with defensive tackle, you lock in your top two,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh
then you
yeah.
then you have a few question marks afterwards. Here, I think with defensive end, your top three rotations, you're pretty
Oh
much
yeah.
locked in. You're good to go. And we know they like to rotate. That's something that
Oh
you
yeah.
mentioned earlier,
Yep.
where Mike Norvell said, I basically went back and looked at all the championship level teams over the past
Yep.
few years, how they use their defensive linemen. And so it might be a little tougher to do on the defensive tackle position. I personally would like to see them get another D tackle out of the portal.
Please.
But I think at defensive end, I think you feel good about being able to rotate any one of these top 6 guys and get significant production out of them.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is, iron sharpens iron, right? Iron sharpens iron. So these guys, they're gonna compete and they're gonna
Yeah,
be in their face. They're gonna do all they can. And that's what we need. That's the thing about this offseason spring that I'm really excited for, Jesse, is the fact that not only do we have talent, but we have a lot of talent, which
yeah,
means that talent's going to push each other, which means it's going to bring out the best of you. And if it doesn't bring out the best of you, then you shouldn't have been here in the first place, right?
right,
And so that's what along this defense, along all of these positions, but especially on this defensive line, man, you're going to see the best of the best. You're going to see them really push and challenge each other for those starting spots, even though knowing that, yeah, hey, as long as you're on the 2 deep, you're going to get a chance to play because you're going to get rotated in.
right,
But man, you want the significant snaps. You don't want just like any old meaningless snap. You want snaps when the game is on the line because that's what the NFL film is watching.
right,
They're watching when the game is on the line. Are you able to make a play? Are you able to dominate the person in front of you? And so that talent is going to be able to push each other to get there. And that's what I'm excited for to see this spring, to see the competition come out. Man, this is old Florida State football where you had
right.
talent on talent, and they're just beating each other up because they're trying to start. They're trying to play.
Right, you have guys that would have easily started on the 2020, 2021, 2022 team that may be rotational players now. And
Right.
even if you think about last year, you didn't really have anybody pushing
That's right.
Jared Verse and Patrick Payton. But I mean, obviously, you didn't need anybody to push them because they were already really good. So the last position group battle that we're going to be watching, that we're going to talk about today, is at linebacker. Now, this is one that you kind of got to flip the page a little bit and talk about in a different
Mm,
light here. This is one where you don't exactly love everything that you have at the position. It's not that you don't love it. You're just very unsure about what you're going to get from it more than
correct.
anything. And I think with the linebacker, the conversation becomes obviously it was looking at the pieces that you have. It was big to get DJ Lundy back. I mean,
Yes.
knowing that
Yes.
you didn't really do a lot, you haven't really done a lot in high school, and the portal, you only really brought in one guy, whereas you had targeted a few. You missed out on the Cam Riley kid and all that stuff. But you feel like DJ Lundy's got that spot locked down. Now, DJ Lundy was great against the run. I think he was Pro Football Focus's highest graded linebacker against the run the entire season last year. He's a physical specimen for a football player. He looks the
Yep.
part. He can take a step forward for sure. That's not to say that he can't get better. I think this is kind of like when we talk about with safety. You have
Yep.
one guy that you hang your hat on, but then who's next? because when you look at the linebackers, okay, so you bring in Sean Murphy from Alabama. This is a
Yeah,
guy that obviously he got recruited by Alabama, so
that's right.
the clay is good. But he hasn't played a whole lot. I mean,
Yeah,
he hasn't. 6'2", 225. He's got the size, exactly what you want in a linebacker. You just haven't seen it on the field yet. Blake Nicholson, this is another guy,
yep,
extremely good clay, high ceiling. We've seen him play a little bit at Florida State. He had some moments where he flashed. He had some moments where he looked like a freshman,
yeah,
but he doesn't have a lot of experience. So can he find a way to get, and he's 6'3", 215 listed on the roster. So you maybe want to see him get a little bit of mass added there, but maybe he's more of like a cover linebacker. And then you also have Justin Cryer, a guy that came in, transferred in from Northwestern, first year on campus last year, didn't really contribute a whole lot, but is a guy that
yeah,
has been talked about as being a significant contributor this year. Then you also throw into that mix Omar Graham Jr., a guy
yeah,
that we've been kind of waiting to turn into something. We've heard some good and some bad, kind of some mixed reviews there.
yeah,
That kind of gets to be about it. I mean, you have DeMarco Ward, who's a redshirt freshman, and you have Tamir Hickman Collins, who's a true freshman in there. You have a
yep,
couple other guys. You the talent level drops off after you get past the first four that we talked about.
yeah,
And I think it's going to be DJ Lundy, but then you're going to have Sean Murphy, Blake Nicholson, Omar Graham Jr., and Justin Cryer fighting for that second and third spot because we know they run a 4-2-5 most of
right,
the time.
right,
So you
right,
really only need to get two good linebackers and a couple of rotational pieces. But if you go to a 4-3, you need to find that third guy. And so
exactly.
this is one where maybe the cupboard is not as overflowing as the defensive end position, but you have some pieces that can be productive for you. It's just how are they going to shake out on the depth chart? And I'm assuming we probably hope that it goes DJ Lundy, Sean Murphy, Blake Nicholson, Justin Cryer, then Omar Graham Jr., because that's just from a talent perspective, those are your top three guys from Lundy, Murphy, and Nicholson. But again, you got to see it play out in practice. And
Yep,
that's one thing that we're really going to be watching for in the spring because you lose a guy like Tatum Bethune, who maybe doesn't project as a high quality NFL linebacker, but he was a great college
great
linebacker.
college. Yep,
100+ tackler at UCF, transferred in, was great for you at linebacker. Kalen DeLoach really had a strong season
yep,
his senior year. We talked about this before the show. Personally, I would like to see them get another linebacker who could be
yes,
you don't have to be exceptional, but just find me another Tatum Bethune, a guy who was productive at the college level. But
yep.
this is by far, I think, your biggest position group of concern for 2024 period. And it's just who is going to be that next guy to step up because you have a lot
Yeah.
of unknown at this position.
Yeah, this one was for me the biggest one. I mean, wide receiver, like I'm excited. I think all the other position group battles that we talked about today are exciting battles. This
Yeah.
one is nerve wracking because it's
Yes.
like,
Yes.
and we pride ourselves on being a fair show, a fair organization, and so we're not going to throw coaches and anybody under the bus here. But to say the least, linebacker play, not last season, but linebacker recruiting, let's go with that, has been subpar, right?
Yeah.
And so, again, here we are going into the season with massive question marks about who our linebackers are going to be, how they're going to step up. And yes, I absolutely agree with you. Guys, we got to go to the portal and get another one. We need another one. We were saying before the pre-show, we were kind of joking, but we were basically like 99.9% serious.
Yeah.
Like, let's just go find one of those linebackers from, a Power 5 program that's in the portal, that has like 100 tackles. They're consistent. They may not be the greatest linebacker, but they've got proof in the pudding, production. They're going to be right where they need to be. They're going to stuff the run. They're going to cover okay. That's what we need. We just need one more that can you just feel good. Like, okay, this player is going to do their job, right? Because again, DJ Lundy, great line. I mean, great size, all that stuff. Question marks as linebacker. Omar Graham, he had some flashes, had some bad flashes. Blake Nicholson had some good flashes, had some bad flashes. Sean Murphy, we don't know much about him. He was at Alabama, so he got recruited. We got recruited over too.
Yeah.
Justin Cryer, who yes has a lot of potential and still don't know much about. And so you just want a serviceable linebacker. I mean, yes, the predominant defensive alignment that they play in is that 4-2-5, and so two linebackers at most are going to be on the field at times. Sometimes they switch into that 4-3. Now, if they switch into that 4-3, we kind of talked about this a little bit, that, if MJ Jr. is in the lineup there, you do have the ability, though it's not his natural position, to leverage him in some cases, not all
Right.
cases, in some cases. So we need another linebacker here. This is probably the position group, Jesse, I'm going to be watching the most, because I'm just trying to figure out who's going to be those two serviceable linebackers who they don't have to be superstars. They just can't hurt the defense. They can't just be letting
Right.
running backs run all over them and letting, tight ends run free in the middle of the field. That's what we're looking for.
Right. You don't need Dick Butkus back there, but or
Correct.
Brian Urlacher or something like that. But you need some guy. And I don't want to pick on anybody, so I won't say any names for the other end of the
Right.
spectrum. But I think really what you're looking for out of spring is you're looking for that number 2 guy to step
Yeah.
up, no matter who it is. I
Right.
think, if Sean Murphy can turn out to be who you think he is, why they
Right.
brought him in. And again, we just talked about how the staff has a
Correct.
great ability to identify talent and develop them. I think if he can step up, you feel eminently better about this position group.
Yep.
I think if you just hear that Blake Nicholson is developing and some of these other guys are starting to get where they can be in that contributing role, you would feel better about the position. But I'm
Yeah.
with you, man. I think like one more college ready,
Mhm.
step on the field, ready to go type of linebacker from the portal that has played, that has experience, I think would really severely benefit this room. But it's still going to be a question mark going into the season. I mean,
Yeah.
they've got some guys that you like, but none of them are really, really high level players.
That's right.
And I mean, we've talked about it before. In a 4-2-5 defense, if you had to kind of pick one weakness, it would be linebacker. But great
Yep.
linebacker play can take your defense to that next level.
Oof. Yes.
And again, you like what you get out of DJ Lundy. Being fair, there's a reason he didn't start last year.
Yep.
So I mean, you need him to take a step up.
Yes, you do.
And then you need Sean Murphy to emerge, and then you need the guys. You just want to hear positives about the linebacker room
Yes.
more than anything. I
Yes.
think you just want to hear positives. You didn't really hear a whole lot out of the tour of duty from the linebacker room. Just kind of crickets over there. So this is one that we're going to be keeping our eye on more from a little bit of a different aspect than the other ones we mentioned, where you're so excited about all the pieces that you got that you can't wait to see who makes it on the field. This is the one
Right.
where like you just want to see the pieces that you got turn into guys who can be on the field.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
yeah, and so that's really going to be the main thing that we're watching out of that linebacker room. But those are 5 position groups that we're going to be keeping a close eye on. Of course, obviously, you're going to watch everybody. You want to see how everybody develops. You want to,
Right.
like, I'm excited to see this running back room. I'm excited to see the quarterbacks battle it out.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see a lot of these. I hope to see Landon Thomas, and I'm
Yeah.
hoping to see Jackson West at tight end make some noise in the spring. These are things that you want to see. But these are the 5 position groups that we feel are kind of crucial battles that
That's
are
right.
going to have to play out, not so much do like a position by committee type of deal. So I'm excited, man. Spring gets underway in just a couple of days. Next week on Tuesday, we're going to be watching. Obviously, it's not open to everybody, so we'll have to
Right.
kind of read practice reports and the film that we get to watch. Of course, it all culminates in the spring game on April 20th, where you kind of
That's
get
right.
to see everybody in person for once. And so, man, I'm just really excited about spring. I think this is the time where you find out what this roster's got,
Yep.
how they look in pads. Tour duties, well, it's not fun for them, but it's fun for us. It's fun for us to watch and talk about. But you really never know what you have in a
No.
guy till you can thump in pads and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So it's going to be interesting to see coming up real soon. We'll get to look at this 2024 roster, which we are very excited about.
Yes.
It's how it develops.
Yep.
Can it be what we think it can be? And that's
Yes.
what we're going to get our first look at in spring. So we'll be watching for that. So yeah, man, I'm just really excited for this spring session coming up. And I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we wrap this episode up.
Yeah, man. Like on paper, this looks like it could be another contender. But let's get it from the
Yep.
paper to the practice field to the game. That's how this process goes. And so, yeah, man, spring, we are excited. Like these 5 position groups we're watching, we're excited for every position group, right? As you said, to see how they all develop. But these are the 5 that are going to make a difference. These are the 5 that tells you whether or not you're a contender for an ACC champion to the potential ACC champion and contender for a national champion to a like actual contender for a national championship. And so having our eyes on this to see what the unknown paper talent looks like,
Yeah.
to see if it can actually develop into productive talent. That's going to be really key for this Florida State group this year. Jesse, I'm really excited to see how it comes out. And then also, too, the second part of what comes out of the spring is you get the tea leaves. Okay, this person's probably transferring.
Yep.
You get to probably start hearing about other programs. I'm going to keep an eye. There's some programs out there that I'm going to keep an eye. There's certain players out there that I think might also be potential transfer portal candidates that Florida State might have interest in. Linebackers
Yeah.
and defensive linemen, and maybe another DB too. So there's like 3 position groups that I think Florida State could go in the portal and add, because let's be real, they're going to lose some. It's
Right.
inevitable. They're going to lose some players this season and to the spring transfer portal window. So who do they bring in? We're going to be able to kind of get at least where the wind's blowing with some of that out of the spring. So excited
Yeah.
for it. Can't wait. Let's go Tuesday.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Not only does the spring start to show you if the cards you got are the winning hand, because we
Correct.
feel really good about this roster, but we haven't seen them do it on a field yet. So now you
Correct.
get the feel for that. You also get the feel for maybe we need to look in the portal for a
Mm-hmm.
player. Maybe we're going to
Mm-hmm.
lose a player to the portal. So
Mm-hmm.
this is where things start to get interesting in spring. So I'm excited for it. Like we said, starts off next week. But that's going to do it for us today, guys. This has been our spring preview and the things that we are watching for. Of course, check back in as we have developments. We will obviously keep you guys updated on spring developments, who's rising to the top, who's maybe falling into the shadows. Make sure you check out Alumni Hall FSU to get some new FSU gear and use code SPEAR to get 10% off your order. And as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and go
Go
Noles.
no.